You believe the truth will set you free. It will not. In the arenas of human hierarchy, the truth is merely a peasant's obsession. The moment you open your mouth to explain yourself, you have already surrendered. Picture the scenario. An accusation lands. A subtle, calculated jab across a boardroom table. A lover twisting your narrative to suit their agenda. Instantly, the heat rises in your chest. Cortisol floods your nervous system. Your brain screams that the record must be corrected, that you are being misunderstood, that you must provide context immediately. So you speak, you clarify, you justify, and in that precise second, you have handed them your throat. The world does not evaluate you by the factual accuracy of your words. It measures you by the desperation of your delivery. To explain is to submit. To defend yourself is to involuntarily accept the other person's authority, to act as your judge. You are suffering from authority. Bias, a structural weakness in your psychology that automatically assumes anyone who attacks you holds a higher rank. Look closely at your own biology. Cortisol is not just a stress hormone. In primate hierarchies, it is the biological marker of the subordinate. The apex predator does not spike with anxiety when challenged by a lesser animal. A Roman emperor did not descend from the throne to justify his decrees to the plebeian class. They understood a brutal reality that modern society has deliberately tried to breed out of you. Leverage is infinitely more valuable than the truth. Niccolo Machiavelli, the architect of elite power dynamics, knew that dominance is never about being right. It is strictly about who holds the frame. The instant you mount a defense, you step into their frame. You lock yourself inside their psychological courtroom, happily playing the role of the panicked defendant. But what if you simply refused to take the stand? Most people exist as emotional puppets, violently yanked by the strings of external opinion. Someone frowns, they apologize. Someone accuses, they present evidence. They live in a perpetual state of reactive defense, silently begging for permission to be seen as good, smart, or worthy. It is a pathetic, slow suffocation of the soul. Today, we dissect the dark psychology of the non-defense. We will autopsy why your nervous system betrays you and how to override it with cold, sovereign restraint. I will show you how to render attacks completely immaterial. But be warned, this requires you to kill the fragile part of you that begs to be understood. If you can kill that need, you become untouchable. Your psyche is a fossil. You are navigating high-stakes adult power hierarchies using the emotional operating system of a terrified 5-year-old. Why is your first instinct to provide evidence of your innocence the moment you are challenged? It is a compliance response branded into you during childhood. Think back to when a parent or a teacher cornered you with an accusation. What was your only mechanism to escape punishment? Explanation. I didn't break it, it fell. I didn't hit him, he hit me first. You were programmed to believe that authority figures held a monopoly on judgment, and your survival depended entirely on convincing them that you were fundamentally good. The fatal flaw is that your physical body matured, but your psychological posture did not. You are walking through the modern world projecting that omnipotent authority figure onto everyone you meet, your boss, your partner, the stranger on the internet, even your bitterest enemies. The Milgram experiment exposed this sickening human glitch decades ago. People are pathetically eager to submit to an artificial hierarchy. The moment you defend yourself, you are subconsciously broadcasting, "You are the judge. I am the child. Please accept my plea so I can feel safe." It reeks of weakness, and human beings, predatory as we are, can smell that scent of submission from miles away. The corporate world feasts on this exact dynamic. The second you start rambling in a meeting, frantically producing texts and bringing up past events to prove your intent, you are volunteering for the bottom of the dominance hierarchy. Machiavelli observed that it is much safer to be feared than loved. Translated to the modern social arena, it is infinitely safer to be respected than understood. By rushing to defend your character, you prioritize being understood over being respected. A king does not draft an apology to a peasant. A Stoic recognizes that external judgment is a ghost. It possesses no mass, no kinetic energy, no reality, unless you grant it entry. You suffer from the delusion of the validating self. You believe that if you just articulate your defense perfectly, the attacker will concede. How often does that happen? Never. Because the accusation was never an inquiry into the facts. It was a stress test of your power. They did not accuse you to uncover the truth. They accused you to see if you would jump. And you jumped. The first step to rendering yourself psychologically impenetrable is realizing that the courtroom is an illusion. There is no judge. There is no jury. When you stop anointing other people as your magistrates, their accusations instantly devolve from death sentences into mere opinions. And to a sovereign mind, opinions are nothing but dead noise. Silence is not an absence of sound. In the architecture of power, it is a weapon of mass destruction aimed directly at the human ego. The average mind is fundamentally terrified of a conversational vacuum during conflict. It signals a brutal rupture in the social fabric and forces the aggressor to stand alone in the cold. Imagine the scenario. An adversary throws a verbal spike at you, claiming you are being incredibly selfish. The old reactive version of you would panic frantically, listing the sacrifices you made yesterday to prove your worth. The Machiavellian approach is terrifyingly still. You look at them. You hold unbroken eye contact. You keep your facial micro-expressions completely dead. And you let the silence hang in the air for 3, 4, 5 agonizing seconds. Do you know what happens inside that psychological void? You trigger the Zeigarnik Effect. The human brain obsessively seeks to close open cognitive loops. By refusing to provide the anticipated resistance of a defense, you deny them closure. They are forced to sit in the suffocating tension they just manufactured. Usually they will crumble, speaking again just to fill the abyss. They will backtrack, stammering about how you aren't always selfish before defensively asking why you are staring at them. The power dynamic flips instantly. They are now defending themselves against your absolute stillness. This is the grey rock method elevated to the level of predatory elite negotiation. Sun Tzu taught the doctrine of formlessness. You cannot punch mist and you cannot cut water. If you defend, you bleed information. You reveal your values, your insecurities, the exact coordinates of your emotional buttons. When you shout that you are not stupid, you hand them the knowledge that intelligence is your deepest insecurity. Silence, however, is a dark mirror. It reveals absolutely nothing. And when an attacker is forced to stare into it, they only see their own unhinged aggression reflected back, making them feel profoundly, ironically judged. There are moments when silence is a liability. When the attack is highly public, saying nothing is sometimes misread by the herd as paralysis. In these specific arenas, you do not block the strike. You pull it. You do not push back against the force. You accelerate it into the ground. This is the mechanics of verbal Aikido, known in dark psychology as the Agree and Amplify protocol. The elite of historical court politics understood a brutal law to defend against a lesser rival's insult is to validate their right to speak to you at all. Instead of defending you, deploy Machiavellian theatricality. You lean into the accusation. You exaggerate it until it becomes a grotesque caricature, inducing violent cognitive dissonance in your attacker. They accuse you of being obsessed with money. They call you greedy. The weak defensive prey animal stammers, "No, I'm not. I just want to provide for my family." Boring, predictable, a pathetic waste of caloric energy. The sovereign mind simply says, "You caught me. I actually swim in a vault of gold coins like Scrooge McDuck every Tuesday. It's terrible for my back. You deliver this with a deadpan face or a terrifyingly amused smirk. What exactly just happened? You refused the insult. You took their carefully sharpened knife and casually used it to peel an apple. This is the posture of amused mastery. It is the ultimate expression of high-status untouchability. You have adopted the exact psychological attitude of a parent watching a toddler throw a violent tantrum. You do not get angry at the toddler. You do not debate the toddler. You simply observe the drama entirely unthreatened because you know you are immune. When you defend yourself, you are crawling down onto the floor to scream with the child. Do not do that. Stand up, look down, smile. Robert Greene articulates this in the 48 Laws of Power under Law 25, Recreate Yourself. The foundation of absolute power is violently refusing the identity others attempt to thrust upon you. When they label you, they are constructing a psychological box. If you fight the box, you validate its walls. If you mock the box, you dissolve it completely. You're arrogant. I prefer the term charmingly confident, but sure. It is savage. It is dismissive, and it flawlessly strips status from the challenger without spending a fraction of your emotional currency. A person who knows they are generous laughs genuinely when called stingy. If you are defending, it is only because a terrified fraction of your psyche fears they might be right. And that is the shadow work you have been avoiding. Every conversation you have ever participated in is a lie. Beneath the polite surface-level exchange of words lies a hidden, ruthless architecture of dominance, a metastructure of power that dictates exactly who bends and who breaks. In the anatomy of any conflict, the space instantly polarizes into an invisible courtroom consisting of two distinct roles, the judge and the defendant. The judge asks the questions. Why did you do that? What were you thinking? The defendant scrambles to supply the answers. You must internalize a chilling linguistic absolute utilized in high-level psychological interrogations. Whoever asks the questions holds the power. Whoever answers is actively bleeding status. The most lethal maneuver in modern Machiavellianism is to entirely refuse the role of the defendant and violently seize the gavel. You do not achieve this by defending your actions. You achieve this by inverting the panopticon effect. Instead of feeling scrutinized by their sudden attack, you make the attacker feel observed, dissected, and exposed. You answer their inquiry with a surgically precise question, psychoanalyzing their behavior instead of justifying your own. They snap, "Why are you always so late?" The prey animal apologizes, babbling weakly about traffic and missed alarms. The sovereign mind simply tilts its head and asks, "Why does my arrival time affect your emotional stability so deeply? Do you see the brutal shift in gravity?" You have just established sovereign immunity within the hierarchy. Suddenly, we are no longer discussing the clock. We are autopsying their psychological fragility. You have turned their spotlight into an interrogation beam. When they frantically call you ridiculous, you reply coldly, "What makes you feel the need to use labels like that to get your point across?" You are dismantling them in real time. It is profoundly infuriating to a manipulator. They expected you on your back foot, desperate for their validation. Instead, you are walking slowly around them, observing their panic like a diseased specimen trapped in a glass jar. It is interesting that you perceive it that way. Does saying that make you feel better? These phrases are not mere conversational deflection. They are an impenetrable verbal force field. They acknowledge the physical noise exiting the attacker's mouth, but entirely reject the psychological content. It is the cold realization that their perception of you is none of your business. Their anger is their sickness. Their disappointment is their solitary burden. When you defend yourself, you are begging to carry their luggage. Drop it. Let them collapse under their own weight. To conquer an enemy, you do not always build a wall. Sometimes the most lethal, structurally devastating maneuver you can execute is to simply open the gates and let them charge blindly into empty space. This is the absolute paradox of power. The most aggressive dominance-flipping move you can make is to agree. But this is not the agreement of the defeated. It is the agreement of the abyss. Imagine an adversary screaming at you, desperately listing your flaws to provoke a collision. You look them dead in the eye, strip all tension from your jaw, and say calmly, "You're right." And then you stop talking. "You're right, I am difficult sometimes." "You're right, I did miscalculate." In clinical psychology, this is known as the fogging technique. What happens when you hurl a stone into a thick bank of fog? Nothing. There is no thud. There is no shattered glass. The kinetic energy is completely swallowed. When you agree with an attacker, you instantly steal their momentum. They were violently pushing against a door, requiring it to be locked so they could feel their own strength. When you suddenly swing the door open, they fall face first onto the concrete. They want resistance. Resistance validates their anger. Agreement weaponizes their own momentum against them. This is the Machiavellian art of strategic surrender. You lay down your sword entirely, which immediately makes the other person look hysterical and unhinged for still holding theirs. But there is a razor-thin nuance here, rooted in Stoic reality testing. Marcus Aurelius practiced the discipline of stripping the emotional narrative from the raw fact. You must agree with the objective truth of their statement, while entirely rejecting the shame they are attempting to smuggle inside it. There is a massive structural difference between admitting an operational mistake and accepting a character assassination. If they sneer, "You messed up this data, you're incompetent." The defensive prey animal cries, "I'm not incompetent, the timeline was flawed." The sovereign mind says, "You are right, the report has errors, I will fix it." Notice the surgical omission. You ignored the insult entirely. You took absolute ownership of the action, but violently refused the identity. An unshatterable ego does not fight to the death to prove its perfection. It simply notes the error and moves on completely undisturbed. But remember, this is not a verbal script. Dark psychology is 20% vocabulary and 80% nonverbal frame. If your voice shakes, if your eyes dart, if your energy secretly begs for their forgiveness, the tactic will collapse. You cannot fake the abyss. You are bleeding because you handed the blade directly to your attacker. An insult only pierces your armor because it strikes a psychological vulnerability you are desperately hiding from yourself. If an adversary claims you have green skin, you do not launch a frantic defense. You laugh. But if they label you a failure and you instantly scramble to prove your worth, it is strictly because a terrified fraction of your psyche suspects they are entirely correct. The ultimate defense in the hierarchy of power is not a memorized linguistic script. It is the ruthless weaponization of self-knowledge. Carl Jung defined this as the shadow, the repressed grotesque components of your nature that you refuse to acknowledge. The amateur attempts to suppress their shadow to appear virtuous. The sovereign mind integrates it, performing the dark alchemy of transforming their own innate capacity for malice and selfishness into a fortress of absolute sovereignty. When you know you are capable of profound cruelty and a rival attempts to expose you as cruel, you look at them with dead eyes and reply, "I can be." The psychological terror inflicted on an attacker in that precise moment is absolute. They realize there is no leverage. You cannot weaponize shame against a sovereign who has already brutally audited their own soul. You cannot expose an entity that has willfully stripped away everything left to hide. This is the structural anatomy of becoming completely untouchable. You cease to be a walled city anticipating a siege. You integrate the exact traits your enemies wish to exploit, rendering yourself entirely transparent. The hostility simply passes through. The arrows find no flesh to tear. You're no longer a fragile fortress requiring defense. You have become the wind. You are an addict. Your drug of choice is not a chemical. It is the fleeting, pathetic validation of lesser minds, and you are about to undergo severe psychological withdrawal. For the next 7 days, you're entering the initiation protocol. The game is absolute zero defense. No matter the scale of the accusation, you are strictly forbidden from explaining your actions or managing anyone's perception. If you arrive late, look them in the eye and state, "I am late." Do not offer the traffic as a sacrificial excuse. If you shatter a glass, state, "I broke the glass." Let them misunderstand you. Sit quietly in the fire of that discomfort. Feel your nervous system panic, begging to control their narrative to play the harmless subordinate. Let that urge burn entirely to ash. You will experience the literal physical withdrawal symptoms of validation. Addiction. Endure it. Observe the environment shift around you. You will watch their initial confusion mutate into profound respect, and finally into a dangerous magnetism. You are executing a Medici-like evolution, transforming from a reactive pawn into a prime mover. Nothing broadcasts apex certainty louder than an entity that refuses to justify its own existence. You are violently plugging the leaks in your psychological energy. You are orchestrating the permanent death of the pleading child and the birth of the sovereign. The herd will attempt to drag you back down. They will bait you starved for your defensive reaction. Deny them, hoard your mystery, weaponize your silence. If this structural reality resonates with the coldest, most ruthless corners of your mind, the part completely exhausted by performing for the gallery, then you know the next move. Subscribe, but do not do it because I suggested it. Treat this action as a Darwinian selection mechanism. Subscribe strictly because you have permanently resigned your position as prey in a world built for predators.